Hi, I'm Chris McBrien, a Gen Xer, and the pop culture from my generation is awesome.
And I'm Yancy Eaton, a millennial, and the pop culture from my generation is dope.
Episode 58, Taxi Driver, Movie Review. Chris McBrien, and this is Pop Goes Your World, the pop culture podcast for the generations. And Yancy Eaton is in the house. Yancy, you know, I was thinking about something, my brother.
What's that?
In order for me to be more hip to your generation,
oh, God.
I decided that maybe it might be a good idea if I use some millennial terms throughout this entire episode, and we'll just see how it goes. What do you think?
Oh, God. What up, fellow youngsters? Like,
well, I want to be more in touch with you kids, you know, so we'll see how it goes. Anyway, I did want to mention something. Yancy, you sent me a picture recently of yourself. You texted to me when you showed me how you were helping to rebuild your store. And I got to say, man, you are fat.
I am what?
You're fat.
Fat?
Yeah, fat. But not fat like overweight. I mean PHAT like the kids say. Remember, I'm trying to use millennial terms. How's it going? Is it good? Is that how?
Chris, you're about 15 years too late on the fat. I'm sorry.
Well, I will try throughout the episode to drop a couple millennial terms on you, and we'll see how it goes. Are you ready to get started?
I'm ready, man. Let's do it.
Okay, faux shizzle. I wanted to go back and watch The Love Boat.
I'm going to give you a lot of reasons to think I'm nerdy tonight.
I've never actually watched Alf.
Jerry Seinfeld's mother.
We were actually just talking about Alf in my house last week.
And I knew you'd be on my side about all this.
Chris, he normally has the textbook answer.
The Love Boat.
He obviously has not read the science fiction textbook.
Very cool.
But is it, Chris? But is it cool?
I'll settle down, young man.
I do love this movie.
And yes, Yancy, it is cool, by the way. Okay, so this week I was able to nominate a movie to you, Yancy, and I decided to go with Taxi Driver. I'm not talking about that Queen Latifah that came out with a couple years ago. I'm talking about the 1976 classic film. I believe it's a classic anyway. So you had never seen the movie, is that correct?
I thought we were reviewing Queen Latifah's Taxi Driver.
Oh, man, I knew this was
I kid. No, I had never seen it before. We mentioned in a trivia question a couple episodes ago with Caveman that, I know of it. I know that it's important and that it's significant and it's referenced a lot, but I'd never actually gotten around to seeing it. No.
So that's good. That's one of the good things about doing this podcast is we get a chance to watch each other's, films from our different generations, that kind of thing. Funny that you mentioned Caveman because I do recall when he was on the show that episode and he did say that he didn't really care for Taxi Driver all that much. So I thought it'd be interesting to get your take on things because we mentioned before, I think you've mentioned it the most, is that you and Caveman tend to have a more similar taste in pop culture. So it'll be kind of interesting your take on this. So initial takeaway from watching the movie, yes, no, good, bad. What was your take?
Well, let me just say that when you say that we have similar tastes in music, in pop culture and music and movies, that means a good taste. Like he likes good movies like I do. So
that's right. Oh man, throwing shade on me.
Yeah. Chris, I'm not going to lie. This was one of the best movies I've ever seen. Yeah, and I don't mean to kind of, just patronize you or to tell you what you want to hear or tell the audience what you want to hear. But I put this movie on my TV. I rented it, and it's on a 60-inch screen TV, and I have the sounds blaring and everything. And I just remember for 2-something hours, I can't remember exactly how long the film was, I was just completely enthralled with this. Where like there were so many different scenes and so many different moments where I thought something very, very drastic was going to happen, and it didn't. Or I was just so immersed in the scene, and I was so immersed in the cityscape and just the grunge and the lived-in like realistic feel of New York City. Like it felt like one of the most accurate time capsules of like life in a specific point in time that I ever remember seeing in a film. Everything felt so real. How the characters interacted with each other, the scenes, the actual everything. Just there was every single part of this movie I loved and I got, and I was just so invested with it. And I'm not gonna lie, I wasn't expecting that. I thought this was going to be just a really kind of like a doldrum, very minimal dialogue, just lots of like scenes and like very introspective. But it wasn't. It was all these things wrapped up in one. And I know this is kind of like a long answer, but I was just super impressed from top to bottom with it. It's a beautiful film.
It definitely is. Now, so what was your take on Scorsese, I guess, before you went into this movie? From a millennial point of view, you've probably only known him for his more recent movies like The Departed and Wolf of Wall Street and things like that, maybe Hugo, The Aviator. So what was your take on this movie, because this is really different from those movies, that's for sure. He's definitely, sort of, changed as a director over the years. So, so did this, are you glad that I kind of introduced you to some classic Scorsese?
Yeah, for sure. I mean, I've seen The Aviator, I've seen The Departed. Those are fantastic standalone films. The Aviator, I think when it came out, it was kind of a commercial failure. I don't think it did quite as well as people had anticipated, but that's one of those films where I think in 15 or 20 years, we're going to look at it much higher than we do now, if that makes sense. Like one of those films that will kind of have legs and it'll have a second life, decades from now. But I've never, Scorsese, it's one of those names where everybody knows who it is, and you know that he's important. He's done a lot of work, but unless you've actually kind of like delved into, some of his earlier work, like you never really know what he's about. And that's kind of where I was at too, where I didn't know the cultural significance of all these other films. I knew of the more recent ones. I knew that Wolf of Wall Street was really, really good, but I just didn't have that attachment to him like I do, like a Christopher Nolan or a Steven Spielberg. I just didn't have that personal one-on-one relationship with his movie. So this kind of like got my eyes open. Like I want to look at his whole filmography. Like I want to see everything that he's done and kind of like really explore this guy, because there was a lot of magic in this film.
There's another one that I'll get you to watch in the accompanying episode for sure, and that's Raging Bull, because I still think Raging Bull is his best picture that he's ever made, but this is close. I really like Taxi Driver a lot, and like you mentioned, like right from the beginning, like the movie starts out, it's like these clouds of steam and all the neon lights, and it's almost like a dream like kind of setting that's going on. And then it progresses obviously into this story about Travis Bickle, who basically is slowly going crazy. And the movie to me is like, it's kind of like how can I say, it's almost like like a bad car accident. Like you want to look away, but you just can't bring yourself, you got to look at it. And it's like this, to me, this movie feels like a bad nightmare that you're kind of trapped inside of. And it's so funny because you got Travis Bickle, who's the kind of guy that you'd probably cross over to the other side of the street to avoid him. And yet Scorsese has him front and center as basically the protagonist of the film. And the thing is, though, is that this is not a character study, because we don't really know much about this guy. We don't know where he's from. We don't really know much about him at all. Right. And,
right.
But it's just so many interesting things happen. So, I guess a couple of things we could go into. So some of the themes in the movie that I thought were interesting. Obviously, well, I think we'll come back to this, because I really think that this movie influenced, and I don't know about this for sure, but I'm sure this movie must have influenced Tarantino incredibly so. Like, and
I can see that.
Just especially for the end, especially the end of the movie, which we'll come back to in a bit, because the end is really, really wonderful. But just this whole character, and like how his relationship with women, I think is very, very interesting, because he just can't connect with any women. But then even when he gets close to one, Betsy, right, and then she finds out like he's really strange, and it's totally his own doing, of course. Like, and it's funny, he has that first date with her, and it's relatively normal when they go out for pie. And then on the next date, he takes her to go see a pornographic film. So he's like he's just odd. And it's funny. He's got like these sexual frustrations going on, because then he's also driving around in a cab, and then, he's cleaning out the back seat of his taxi. You know what I mean? Like there's hookers all around him, and he keeps going back to 42nd Street and Times Square. And then that whole fare that he picks up about the guy in the backseat talking about shooting the girl in the genitals and all that, like that horrible. And by the way, did you recognize who that actor was?
I did, but not at first. It was because I did, for the trivia questions that we're going to do in a later segment, I found out exactly who it was. It was Scorsese.
It was Scorsese.
Interesting.
The actor that was supposed to play it, I think, got sick or something at the last minute. So Scorsese sat in and played that, which was Martin Scorsese was a really high strung kind of guy back then. And I think he was probably, involved in a lot of I want to say drugs, but I mean, it probably was. So he just seemed very, very high strung. And that part, it was just chilling. I thought that he played that, but, so obviously, I don't know if you're aware of this either, by the way, just as a bit of an aside. But obviously Bickle becomes obsessed with Betsy, and he tries to assassinate Palatine, right? He's like, guy's like running for president or something. In 1981, John Hinckley Jr. tried to assassinate President Reagan at the time. And it turns out that he was obsessed with Jodie Foster, and he was trying to impress her by assassinating the president in his mind, some sort of bizarre reenactment of this film.
Ugh.
So I don't know. So I don't know if you ever knew about that or heard about that, but
No, I didn't. No.
yeah, it's just I don't know. I'm like you. Like I really love. So what were some of the themes that you liked about the movie? I like the idea of him driving around and seeing all this filth, which you mentioned, by the way, the filth that you see everywhere. There was a garbage strike in New York at the time, and so all that garbage you see everywhere, it's real.
Damn it, Chris! You're making trivia so difficult.
Man, I'm sorry.
This is why I have to write like 15 questions, because by the time we actually get through the first part of the podcast, like you've basically said everything that I want in the trivia. But
so in other words,
I didn't know that either. But
so in other words, I'm totally on fleek.
You are. Oh my God! Please stop.
Just call me the goat, right?
I want to give you credit, Chris, but like all of these like phrases and catchphrases that you're saying, like they were popular like years ago.
Yeah, I know. What can I say? Yes.
Yeah. Anyways, so like talking about themes,
yes.
I think the main theme of this movie is loneliness and kind of like the propagation of loneliness itself. And it's not so much about like like the city is a big part of it, but like it's really just about like you mentioned, slowly watching this one individual person who we don't really know a lot about, other than he's an ex-Marine and he drives a taxi cab and he doesn't really have a lot of social attachments. That's really all we know, is that this is a guy who is, slightly disturbed. He's probably dealing with some sort of, post-traumatic stress disorder. He was in Vietnam, and he's just incredibly, incredibly isolated. And I don't want to get into too much specifics, but from a personal standpoint, I had insomnia for about 1.5 years, almost 2 years, and I was down to 130 pounds at 6 foot, almost 6'2", 6'1", and I was really, really unhealthy. And I would go days and days without sleeping. It was a really dark time in my life, and I tried everything. So I can kind of relate to him in that sense, where like he just cannot go to sleep, and it alters your mind in so many different ways. I can understand that. And I also had a friend who was a very, very close family friend of ours, who actually kind of did unravel. And at this point now, he actually lives in a group home that assists with like people who are mentally disabled. And that's kind of where he's at now, where he's not the same person he was before. And it's kind of weird seeing this, because, Robert De Niro's depiction of this guy, this character, Travis Bickle, I don't want to say it's hyper realistic, but there was never a point in this where I felt like he was trying too hard, or like Dustin Hoffman in Rain Man. Like he does such a good job of being in that state of mind, while actually not like just over exaggerating every single intricacy of like what it is to have that type of condition. And I think Robert De Niro did a really good job of this, where you truly believe that this is a man that is completely deranged. He's detached from reality, like I said, painfully lonely, dealing with all these different internal struggles. You mentioned his frustrations with women, where he can't ever truly connect to women of the opposite sex. Like there's just a lot going on here, and the way he delivers it, his acting performance is just, it's so captivating. And I've always known that Robert De Niro was a good actor, and I've never seen The Godfather, which I know is really, really bad, really, really bad. And we'll have to watch that too. But
I'll get you to watch that one for sure.
Yeah, I've seen a bunch of De Niro films where I thought like, yeah, he's a pretty good actor, but it never blew me away to where I thought, this is one of the preeminent actors of the last 25 or 50 years. Whenever I watched this, though, like I said, I was just so incredibly captivated by how realistic it was, how believable his character was, and how just in it he was. I mean? It really took my breath away.
Well, like I say, I'll get you to watch some of his movies, as we go on doing this podcast. But this one would definitely be one. Godfather 2, he was good in. But to me, oh man, when you watch Raging Bull, then you're going to be like, okay, now I get why Robert De Niro is a legend. But to me, his two best movies are Scorsese's best movies, and that's Taxi Driver and Raging Bull, that's for sure. It's interesting, yeah, the insomnia part, like he obviously starts driving the cab at night because he can't sleep, right? And the whole feel of the film, especially those night scenes around the city, it's almost ethereal. Like it's almost dreamlike, I guess, like more like nightmare-like, I guess. And
yeah,
yeah, go ahead.
Sorry, you touch on this, not to cut you off, Chris, but you touched on this at the very top of the podcast, where you were talking about like a dream state.
Yeah,
there were so many scenes in this movie, Chris, where like my mind was almost trying to like fill in the holes, and and basically I was trying to outsmart myself and be like, oh, he's dreaming here, or this isn't really happening. I was so spellbound by what was actually real and what was a dreamlike state. You know what I mean? Like, I felt like my own perception of what was going on was mirroring that of Robert De Niro's character, where I wasn't sure what was real. Does that make sense?
Oh, yeah. Yeah. And even he mentions at one point, he says, "I'm God's lonely man." You know, so like,
God, that's painful.
Yeah. like it's, oh, yeah, no, definitely good. I want to talk about two scenes. And remember, we talked before about films versus movies. This definitely falls in the film category for me. The way that Scorsese uses the medium to tell the story. And there's two scenes in the movie that just have always stood out to me. And so the first one is the scene when, remember after he takes Betsy to the porno film and he offends her, right? And remember he goes and calls her from the payphone? Do you remember that?
Oh, and he's talking to her, and the camera pans away.
Yeah,
he's
talking to her, and he's trying to make up with her. Well, maybe we can go out again. Maybe we can go out sometime. Maybe we can go out sometime. And Scorsese has said himself that scene is the most important scene in the film, because just like you say, the camera kind of dollies to the right, and she's turning him down, right? And the camera moves away and shows the long corridor. I think it's almost like to say that watching Bickle get rejected, it's too hard for the audience to watch. It's too much for the viewer, you know. But then during the shootout scene in the murders at the end of the movie, everything is shown in like great detail, like when he shoots Matthew the pimp, and he shoots, like, remember the guy's leaving and he shoots him in the hand, and then he gets shot in the neck and the arm, and he goes in the room, there's some random guy there, he blows his brains all over the wall, like right in front of her. And then the camera then even moves up, like through the ceiling, to show the whole bloody scene. But watching him get rejected is just too hard to see. But
isn't that interesting?
Isn't that interesting? Yeah, it's like, that's why
yes.
It's so incredible. The fact that the camera pans away from him too and shows that long hall, like you said, it's almost like, okay, this is a different path that he now has to take. He's been turned down, so he's going to take a different path. It's, I don't know. Oh, it's just incredible. Incredible.
It was powerful. And that scene, Chris, like I didn't know that Scorsese's, you know, he said that was actually the most pivotal scene in the movie. But for me, watching that as somebody, you know, who tried his luck at dating and, you know, obviously got rejected at times, like I felt that internal strife, like that personal struggle that he was dealing with. It was super, super painful. It was very, very awkward. And this was a guy where you almost feel bad for him, because, like, you know, a normal person would say, yeah, you know, it's your second date and you took her to, you know, like an X-rated film. Like, what were you thinking? But he genuinely didn't think that would be a problem. He didn't find any sort of issue with that whatsoever, you know. And so this is a guy who wasn't trying to be creepy. He wasn't trying to be, you know, over the top or turn her off or anything like that. But, you know, he was just genuinely weird, and having to reconcile that, and in hearing it over the phone and hearing this girl basically become completely disenfranchised with him. It's painful. It's like you said, it was a turning point in the film, because it's just this visceral reaction that you see, and that subtle just pulling away of the camera and like going down like a blank corridor, like, you know, all it said to me was just like despair. You know what I mean? Like there's only one pathway that this guy can go down, and it's a lonely corridor where there's nobody else. And it was just, I don't know, it was just incredibly, incredibly heartbreaking.
It's funny, when the movie came out, obviously critics loved it. Audiences really took to the film as well. The Academy took notice. So it got nominated for 4 Academy Awards in 1976. It was nominated for Best Picture. It lost to Rocky. Man, that was a good year for movies too, because Network and All the President's Men were out that year too. De Niro was nominated for Best Actor. He lost to Peter Finch in Network. I get it. I mean, you know, Finch's performance is pretty iconic. And he died earlier in the year, so the Academy gave him to him, you know, posthumously. But Jodie Foster was nominated for Best Supporting Actress. She lost to Beatrice Straight. You know, Beatrice Straight, she was in Network, but you might know her. I think you've told me you've seen Poltergeist, right? And I'm talking about the original.
I've seen Poltergeist once, years and years ago.
No, Beatrice Straight was in that. And then the film was also nominated for Best Score, Bernard Herrmann. He lost it to The Omen, but this was Herrmann's last film. And Herrmann was really good too, man. He did a lot of stuff with Hitchcock. He did Psycho and Vertigo, which, Yancy, I know you like those movies. So, yeah, like I say, critics really loved it. Audiences loved it. I've got a couple questions for you when it comes to this movie, if I could.
Sure.
So the first question. Last episode, we were reviewing Children of Men, your film that you nominated.
Yep.
And I asked you this question, and I'm going to ask this again of Taxi Driver. The end of the movie, and this might sound crazy, but is the end of the movie a downer, or is it in any way positive or hopeful, or how did you interpret the ending?
Man, honestly, I wish I had more time. Normally, I try to watch the films that you suggest to me twice. I'll watch them like 1 or 2 days after we do the podcast, and then I'll watch them again, maybe that Thursday or Friday before we record. So it gives me kind of a chance to like revisit things. And, I'll do some reading, and I'll try to do a little bit of back, research and stuff to kind of see, what are some of the major themes that I maybe didn't catch up on the first time. And whenever I watch this, like I said, I didn't have a time to go back through and rewatch the ending. But I remember feeling almost cheated. Like I was expecting this film to go one certain way. And, it seems so definitive that, this was a guy that was going to go out and he was going to go out on his terms, but it was going to end abruptly for him. This was a guy that was, he was radicalized in like his thought process, and he was basically succumbing to the fact that he was going to die, killing these people. And to see like all of a sudden he's a hero and he's applauded by Iris's parents for returning, their daughter to them. And, he gets written up in like the local paper. It almost feels like, this is a guy who technically did kill multiple people, and there's never any sort of, recompense for that. Like he's just, all of a sudden he's on the up and up, and he's okay. And he makes up with, Betsy, and I don't know, it left me not knowing what to feel. You know what I mean? There's so many points in this film where I mentioned at the top of the show where I thought it was going to go a certain way. Like whenever Scorsese's character was in the backseat saying he's going to kill that woman up there in the building, I thought for sure, I'm like, well, this is definitely the turning point. This is where, Travis is going to kill this guy right in his car. He's going to strangle him, or he's going to shoot him, or, there were other scenes where I'm like, oh, he's definitely going to kill this senator. And it just never happened. And then for the end of like this, like I said, for him to go into this, this house, this, I don't want to say whorehouse, it's a little offensive, but to go into this house and to kill multiple people.
You call it a chicken ranch.
A chicken ranch. Yeah. Okay, that's interesting. To go into this chicken ranch.
You never heard that? You never heard that expression before?
I have not. You hang out at different places than I do, apparently.
Oh man, Hundo P. It's called a chicken ranch. Yeah. Trust me.
Interesting, but so I just didn't expect it like this. Like I said, like it felt destined that this was a guy who was going to succumb to mental illness and was eventually going to take his life, or he was going to die at the hand of, the people that he's trying to kill. And then, like I said, it completely uprooted me from like what I was expecting whenever, like you see, like I said, all of a sudden he's recovered, he's alive, he's regarded as a hero by a lot of different people. And it left me not knowing what to think, to be completely honest with you. I mean, what were your thoughts on the ending?
Well, I think it's interesting you mentioned how he becomes a hero, because just like you said, you see the press clippings, and then, Iris went back home to her father. And really what it comes down to is Travis kind of liberated her, right? By exacting retribution on her pimp. But I'm wondering, like, I always wonder, like, did he mean to liberate her the whole time? Because it's kind of tough to say, because if he was successful in assassinating the senator, like, he probably would have been killed by the Secret Service, right? As it was, the Secret Service suspected him, so then he ended up running away, and then he just sort of turned his attention on Iris's pimp and his bodyguard, right? So
right.
I've got a theory for you, though, because you said that you didn't really like the way it ended, and then he's a hero, and he gets back together with Betsy. There's a theory, though, that suggests that the end of the movie is actually not real, that instead, Bickle dies after the shootout. And the end of the movie is just his dying thoughts. I think it was Roger Ebert, actually, that suggested that theory. But a lot of movie critics have kind of bought into it. But so the idea is that he died. He got shot in the neck. I mean,
that's wild.
so it's just he's almost dreaming as he, slips into death. That he's now a hero. And then he got Betsy back. And it's an interesting theory. And I think if you go back and watch the movie with that in mind, then you're going to be like, ooh, wait a minute. This has some merit, maybe. It's something to think about. Anyway.
Yeah, so if we can accredit that ending, that, where he gets the letter from the parents and he's in the local paper and he makes up with Betsy, it's literally checking off all the boxes of, like, what is the best possible outcome for this scenario, right? All the things that he wants to happen in the absolute best case scenario, it all happens for him. And like you said, like, I didn't hear that. If I had a chance to do a little bit more research, I could have seen, some more of these, fan theories, basically. But the idea that it is basically, an end of life endorphin, laced, almost like a mirage before you actually pass away. And that's just us seeing like his last thoughts that his brain is conjuring up as he's dying. I mean, that makes it, from one of the most, kind of confusing endings of all time to one of the most badass instantly. Like if that is actually what happened, then I mean that's pretty amazing. I don't know if we'll ever get 100% clarity on that, but that's...
I don't know. And I think that's, you've always mentioned that you like movies that kind of have an ambiguous ending. And so maybe this would feed into that because it just doesn't make sense. Like you go through this whole movie, it's this, and it's funny, we talked before about these dystopian films, and this one is like, it's, like this nightmarish world, and it's a kind of a downer. It's all about, this guy that's lonely, like we said, and, and he's kind of, disenfranchised from society, and he slowly goes mad, and then he gets rejected by the girl, and so then he goes, and it's this violent ending,
and it offers no recourse.
Yeah,
it just shows like what is the plight of this one guy by himself, this one isolated, mentally disturbed guy. It is 100% a nihilistic film until the very end, which it just seems like a huge contradiction of everything that was building up the entire time. It left me, honestly, Chris, like the very ending, it left me so, I don't know what the word is, but just like, I just felt like a wandering soul, just like looking for answers. You know what I mean? Like I really didn't know what I was supposed to feel. And I almost felt like I missed the boat on this. I'm like, wait, that's the ending? Like what? You know what I mean? Like I was literally struggling to find like meaning in the end of the film. It was wild. I've never experienced something like that in a movie.
Oh, there you go. So again, maybe if you get a chance, go back and watch the movie again with that in mind on the end. Just because, like you say, the end of the movie, all of a sudden, like all this sort of awful stuff is happening, super violent ending, and then all of a sudden, the very, very end, it's like, it's super nice. Oh, everything's good. He's a hero. Gets the girl back. Well, that doesn't make any sense, right? So that was my one question, was about the end of the movie. The second question I have, and we've addressed this issue on past episodes of the podcast here, but Yancy, do you think this movie could get made today?
I do. It's one of those things where, I mean, if you look every single year, the actor or actress that wins Best Actor or wins a Golden Globe, or they're always playing something where either they had to lose a lot of weight, or they had to gain a lot of weight, or they're playing mentally disabled people, or they're playing somebody who's just completely deranged, or the Academy, for whatever reason, like they really prop up those type of performances where you're basically stepping out of your element and becoming something entirely different than what you are. And I think, like we talked about last week, Chris, about how there is such a huge demand for these kind of dark, ominous films where it kind of seems like the whole world's coming to an end, or at least like the whole world for the main character is coming to an end. I do feel like this could be made. And the only thing that I would have qualms with was, the whole Iris part, like her basically being like a child sex slave. I think that would turn some heads for sure. But ultimately, I think in the sake of art, I think it would be allowed to be made. But definitely rated R. Definitely not something you would take your your child to see or something like that. But yeah, I do think it could be made.
So my take is, I don't think it could. I don't think it could. And because there was a bit of a movement that was going on back in the 70s, right? So the movie system itself was in flux. Like before that, movie making was always sort of a product of the studio system, right? And you know all about that. Like, studios were churning out films and they were responsible. It was a studio system was in place. And it started to change kind of in the late 50s and into the 60s, things kind of changed. But then when it got into the early 70s, when Easy Rider came out in 1969, that movie Easy Rider was a game changer. It cost less than $500,000 to make. It grossed $60 million at the box office. And suddenly there was this sort of deification of the director when it came to movies. Prior to that, like I said, the studios sort of ruled the roost when it came to making movies. Now, all of a sudden, you got this nobody, Dennis Hopper, who directed Easy Rider, and people start looking to the director as sort of the driving force behind film. So for me, this kind of led to a couple of things. One, it allowed kind of the small name new directors to get projects off the ground, like Scorsese did here with Taxi Driver. Another thing is Easy Rider sort of spawned the idea of the anti-hero, as the lead character.
Right.
And the last thing was, and this I think is important, is when Easy Rider came out and was a success, it made it okay to have a movie end on a downer. Instead of having all the things wrapped up, nice and tight. And so this movie sort of played on that and twisted it all around by having this super violent ending and then flipped it back around again. So I guess what I'm trying to say is, when it comes to your millennial sort of dystopian films that that you love so much and I'm always picking on you for, I think in a lot of ways you can thank these kinds of movies from the 70s as sort of paving the way for that type of
For
film.
sure. Yeah,
But
for sure.
That, and that's one of the reasons why I wanted to select it for us to talk about on the podcast. But that being said, I just don't know if this movie could get made today. A 12-year-old prostitute, this crazy taxi driver who decides he's going to exact, this retribution on her pimp. Like I said, I just don't know if it would. I just don't know if it would or not. I'm glad it was made in 1976 because I love this movie and it's such an incredible film. And like I say, Martin Scorsese, he had trouble getting this off the ground originally. I mean, he'd only really done a couple of movies before that. He did Boxcar Bertha and he did Mean Streets. But I mean, to be able to get this off the ground, it was really tough. And it wasn't until he was able to get De Niro to sign on that it, really took flight. But obviously, going back and watching this, you get a really good appreciation, hopefully, of just some of the great films that came out of the 70s.
Yeah, for sure. I know we're wrapping it up now, but I just want to say that I found a lot of pleasure in just kind of the way that this film was shot, where there were scenes where it was literally just like a close shot of, the bumper of the taxi cab, and you just see like the cityscape and the lights bouncing off of it and hitting it like that. There were all kinds of like really crazy shots where it's just people walking down the street, or like you said, it was just filth in the streets. It did such a good job of kind of conveying what life was like in the city where, it's just, even if there were no acting in it and it were just like a silent movie, I still think I would have gotten something out of this film just because all of the shots are so, so beautiful throughout this whole thing. And which is really surprising considering the time that this movie was made, the technology that they had to work with. And it was still just beautiful.
Mm-hmm. So overall, we've mentioned this in the past, on a scale of sort of 1 to 10, where would you place this film?
I would give this a real high 9, like a 9.7, 9.8. It's next to a perfect film. Like I said, I don't knock a movie if I don't 100%, completely agree with or understand the ending. It's going to take some personal reflection. This is definitely one of those films, Chris, where it's going to require multiple viewings, I think, for me to fully kind of grasp everything that the film is trying to say. But it's, man, when you want to talk about one of the most just piercing, accurate, just enthralling depictions of mental illness and what isolation looks like. And, it's such a prevalent thing right now. It's something that, there's 7 billion people in the world, and a lot of people, despite the fact that there's so many of us, a lot of people feel completely isolated from society, and, they're completely disenfranchised. They're not integrated into daily, life whatsoever. And this is just like a beautiful, metaphor for that. So it really is an amazing film.
And I'm really glad too. Like I said, having Caveman on the podcast recently, and he said he didn't really like it that much. And this is one that you agree with me instead of him. So that's good too. Maybe I'm winning you over. I don't know. Maybe I'm getting you over here, or maybe it's just FOMO on your part. I don't know.
Fear of missing out.
Yeah, I'm young, I'm hip, and I speak the language of the streets. Okay,
I see that.
Yeah. Okay, time now to have some
fun with Yancy.
Okay, Yancy, it's over to you. I nominated this film. That means you get to pepper me with trivia questions on it. So fire away.
Okay, like I said before, I always have a bunch of questions. I've learned with Chris that I have to make a really long list because he's going to cover most of it during the show, so such is life. All right, so the first question, you mentioned that Jodie Foster plays a 12-year-old prostitute in the film. How old was Jodie Foster when she actually played the part?
I think she was 12.
She was exactly 12.
Yeah,
okay.
All right.
That would have been a little bit more tricky, but it was not. Okay. All right.
That's a bargain trick question. Oh, that's another Gen X movie you'll have to get you to watch.
It's lost on me, that reference.
Yeah, Gen Xers out there going, I know what that's from. That's from Johnny Dangerously. Okay, anyway, go ahead.
Okay, so any guess how much did Robert De Niro get paid for his part?
I think he got paid $35,000, and is that right? Is it $35,000?
It's exactly 35.
And what happened was he had settled on the amount of money to be paid for the movie, but then The Godfather 2 came out and it really elevated his status. But he said, you know what? He could have actually kind of sort of battled for a bit more money, and he decided not to, just to be able to get the project made.
Yeah, that's what I read as well. And basically the company themselves were worried because they knew that he deserved more, but the company was so hell-bent on not making the film in the first place. Like, it was basically, like a long shot to make this film as is. And if De Niro asked for any more money, it wasn't going to get made. So it was just kind of cool that he actually honored that and made this film. And, here we are talking about it however many years later. But okay, so I was talking about Jodie Foster. So she was 12 years old whenever she was, in this movie in Taxi Driver. There were a couple scenes where she actually required a body double because it was obviously too inappropriate for a 12-year-old girl.
Right.
Can you name the actress that played her body double?
I don't know her name, but it was her sister. It was her older sister.
Yep, it was her 19-year-old sister, Connie Foster.
Connie. Okay, there you go.
Okay, good job, Chris. You're really good at this.
Yeah.
Okay, so who played... Actually, let me go down a little bit. You answer that too. Okay, so you mentioned Bernard Herrmann, right? He composed the entire score for this film.
He did.
And he died posthumously, but he was awarded multiple awards for his work on the score. So what was the first film that he ever produced a score for?
Well, it's my favorite film of all time, and that would be Citizen Kane.
Is it your favorite of all time?
Yep.
Interesting. Okay.
I mentioned that when we did the film versus movie podcast. My favorite films of all time are Citizen Kane is number one favorite film of all time.
Interesting. Okay.
Yeah. I kind of listed them off in that, but no, that's my favorite film. Not my favorite movie. My favorite movie is Star Wars, but my favorite film, quote unquote film, is Citizen Kane.
Oh, okay. You did say that. Okay.
Yep. Love it. Love that.
All right. So who was Martin Scorsese's first choice to play Travis Bickle?
Ooh, that's a great question. It wasn't Dustin Hoffman there. He'd looked at a bunch of actors, like Dustin Hoffman was in, Burt Reynolds and Warren Beatty and guys like that, but I don't know who was his first choice for it. I'm not 100% sure.
I'm going to give you credit for that because it actually was Dustin Hoffman.
Oh, it was Dustin Hoffman? Oh, okay, good. Oh,
yeah,
cool.
It was. I actually mentioned him earlier in the show just to kind of throw you off, but it was Dustin Hoffman. Okay, so in the coffee and pie scene in the diner, you know which scene I'm talking about, of course. What weird topping does Travis order for his apple pie?
He puts cheese on it.
Melted cheese. Yep. Is that a thing? Is that a Canadian thing? What is that?
No,
I've never heard that.
See, that's funny you mentioned that. I always thought that up here in Canada, we always thought that was an American thing, that you put like a slice of cheese. I've heard of people doing that before. I've never wanted to try it. I think, if I'm not mistaken, was it Ed Gein? We've talked about Ed Gein so many times in this podcast. He was like a serial killer in Wisconsin. And I believe that he asked for his final meal before he was executed to have apple pie and cheese. And I think that was the inspiration for this character to eat that in that scene. But I always thought it was like an American thing. You don't put cheddar cheese on top of your apple pie?
I don't. And with that Ed Gein comment, let me just scratch off the next trivia question.
Sorry, man.
It's okay. All right.
You know what? I just got. You know what? I just got to Netflix and chill, and then let you do your thing.
Oh my god!
See what I did?
Do you have like these written down somewhere, or are you just pulling these from memory?
Just pulling them out. Sorry.
All right, I got a couple more if we have time.
Yeah, of course. Lay them on me.
All right. So, which famous musician did Robert De Niro credit as his inspiration for the improvised line of "Are you talking to me"?
So he was at a concert, and it was the boss, Bruce Springsteen, had yelled that out at the concert, and it always stuck with him.
God, man, are you reading like the same stuff I'm reading? Like, this is so frustrating. I always think I'm going to stump you with these, but
I really like this movie. I really like this film a lot, and I have for many, many years. And I don't know. I just love this stuff. So.
All right, let me see. I think I have one more that you haven't already answered. Who was the first choice to play the part of Iris? Martin Scorsese actually mentioned this a couple times in interviews and on YouTube videos that I was able to pull up. There was one actress that he was thinking of specifically, but she actually backed down because she thought that the film was, quote, too weird.
Was it Melanie Griffith? God, yes!
That's a sweep, Chris. Good job, man.
Like I said, I really, really like this film a lot, and it's definitely a classic. It's one I wanted you to watch. I'm glad that we actually didn't watch the Queen Latifah movie about the same name and do that.
I'm a little disappointed, to be honest with you.
Yeah, of course you are. You're a millennial, so it's good. So obviously you enjoyed watching this film. So you don't have to give me one for next week, because next week we'll come back with a top 5 and then we'll go from there. But I'm glad that you liked it. That's good. And there's going to be some that you like. There's going to be some you don't like. Same thing when you give me some of your movies from the millennial generation. I like some, other ones I don't. I usually surprise you with the ones I like and the ones I don't, but it's the way it is. But hey, listen, if you have anybody wants to, chime in on the conversation, we're available on Twitter all the time, right, Yancy? We're at Yancy Eaton and at C. McBrien. You can always go to popgoesyourworld.com and you can find all of our contact information there. Shoot us an email. We answer everything. We're good that way. But hey, if you enjoy the show, do me a favor. And if you're on iTunes, make sure you leave a review for the podcast. We'd certainly appreciate that. That would be great. In the meantime, this is Chris McBrien for Yancy Eaton saying thanks for listening to Pop Goes Your World, the pop culture podcast for the generations.
Thank you for listening to the Pop Goes Your World podcast. Continue the conversation on Twitter at C. McBrien or at Yancy Eaton. Please consider leaving a review for the podcast on iTunes or wherever you download and listen to the show.